Hi there. We are here for our Mystery Monday monthly 2025. And when we were in our first lesson, was the last one, we covered the parallelogram. And with the parallelogram, we created a block, like a single block here, and you have the instructions for that. We also explored the parallelogram as you could use it as a border around a quilt, or you could use it as a border around a panel. And so you had some options that were provided in those instructions as well. And then after that lesson, as I was looking at it, I was looking at my scraps to see what I could work on for our next lesson, which is this one, lesson number 2. And I realized that I had some scraps left over that were a little bit more than what normal was. And I went ahead and made a pattern called, from my friend Cozy Quilt Designs, and it's called Giant Star. And this is one that we're going to be featuring in a coming open house. And I'm going to be showing people how you can make this so easily with the parallelogram and instead of using half square triangles. So for example, the original pattern for this was written entirely with half square triangles. It's all sizes of quilts, from a crib size quilt through a king size quilt. And so it makes it a really terrific pattern. However, the whole thing is made with half square triangles. So I'm going to be showing people how to make this with the parallelogram. And basically the short version of it is if you take a 10-inch square and you fold it in half, you can make this, and you can cut out the two because you have right and lefts to these parallelograms. And so that's how I made this. Now, when I put this together, just as a point of inspiration, what I did was I created this in 8 segments to put it together. So this is a smaller one that I had worked with. It was fun. It's something I've always wanted to do. And this gave me a great chance to do this. Now, if you notice, the parallelograms are there. However, I had to finish these out with half square triangles. However, after that first lesson, you really get a better feel for what a parallelogram is and how you can use the other tools that are in there. So we've had several people asking questions about what exactly this Mystery Monday is going to create. Will it be a finished quilt? I'm not really sure what I'm doing, and I need to have some direction. So here's the point of this one. Several of the people that are participating in this have participated with us in other programs or other pieces, or you have a quilt top that is done, you have a lot of scraps left over, and I decided to do this Mystery Monday as a version that we often do where we'll take panels. And so what you're looking at right now is some of the Mystery Mondays where I put panels together, and we did the Mystery Monday entirely around bordering panels. Those same borders will work on a quilt. They'll work on a table runner. They'll work entirely as just one quilt. You have a pretty fabric in the middle and you frame it. So there's lots of options. They'll also work as sashings. So that's one way to take this. You could take each lesson. You could go find a quilt top that you have started or one that you want to start, or you have a panel and you could frame it. So I've given you instructions for a border. So that's one option. Another option would be that you could create the blocks that we do for each session. So the blocks use the same elements that we're teaching. So this was the first block that we did, and we used the parallelogram. We had a left and a right parallelogram that we made this particular block. And so you could make those blocks. Now I'm going to show you now these are sampler blocks. So sampler quilts is what they call them. And as you can see with these, they have taken the blocks. Sometimes it's 12 blocks, sometimes it's 16, sometimes it's 24. There's so many things you can do with settings. And so I'm showing you different blocks that have been worked into a setting. So the first setting I'm showing you has to do with that we took these blocks and we put them into a vertical setting. So this is, Kay England does several of these in her books, and this one in particular happens to be the Martha Washington. And you can see, basically, it's just putting together 3 table runners. So this is an option to do with your blocks. Another option that I'm showing you now is one that we had done. It was one of our first Mystery Mondays back probably 3 years ago, I think. And this one was called Remember Me. And as you can see, the beautiful thing about this one, the center of that unit is it can be a very large block, or it can be a combination of 4 blocks together, and then the setting around it fits around that, and it has 12-inch blocks. These are all Kay England's designs of blocks, and what she did was putting together the Remember Me quilt was a beautiful way of kind of tripping through her different publications, which is what we did as well. We have blocks that are in that are from at least 6 of her different publications. And in some cases, we made 2 blocks. So this quilt in particular has 2 blocks for everything to put it together. Now, this third setting that I'm showing you this is one of my favorites that Kay has done. She hasn't done it a lot. It's in one of her Voices of the Past books, but it's also on the back cover of a special edition book that she did with a French publisher. And this is a quilt where what she did was her center, you can see this is an exploded Ohio star, and the center of that quilt, she used 4 blocks to put together to make the center. I'm presenting these options for you as looking at and exploring settings. So these 3 that I've shared with you today are 3 options that you could go ahead and keep making blocks to fit them in there. And so when you look at these, you don't have to consider what the finished quilt's going to look like. I really strongly do encourage you to work out of your scraps. If you don't have scraps, go to a fat quarter collection. Go to a layer cake collection. If you don't have anything like that, go to our website and buy some fat quarter groups and start working out of it and start making your own story. Now, a lot of times when people are working on quilts, we look at quilts and we buy the kit because we trust that it goes together and we don't trust our personal voice. And I would encourage you to step out of that a little bit. For example, this fabric up here in the blues, there's a lot of navy blues that work really well together with these. And when I did these pieces, if I was going to work them into a quilt, I could work it into a setting where I might take those navy corners and I might repeat them throughout the blocks and have them next to each other and start making an Irish chain. That might be confusing to you, especially if you're a beginning sewer and you want to see exactly what it's going to look like. My hunch is if you have that fear and you have that anxiety, you trust someone else's pattern more. And I respect that. Go through and look at your patterns or kits that you've already bought and look to see, for the most part, I would say probably a third of the things that you already have, you can fit a 12-inch block into, or I can show you how to make that if you only make 8-inch blocks, or if you make it a 16-inch block. You can take the same blocks that you're working on and make it into a setting that is uniquely your own. Now, what happens if I'm worried about the fabric being from the exact same line? Well, for example, this big giant star that I have a limited amount of fabric left. So as I was working on my next piece that I'm going to put around this, which, by the way, I'm going to be putting the chisels around it, which is our next lesson. And I'm going to be factoring that in. And what I did was I chose a charcoal colored, graphite colored solid for this, which was easy for me to get. I have several yards of it. However, I stuck with a solid that I know the store carries, and I know that I was able to put more into it. My goal is to use up the rest of my scraps to make a border. It's not going to get a whole lot bigger because I don't have that much in scraps. However, I can expand the size of this with that solid fabric that I have and make it a little bit bigger. So I've set some fabric aside for a binding fabric, and I've set things aside so that I have those extra pieces that I know that are going to be important to me. So in summary, what you are learning is you are learning how to start seeing new elements from your AccuQuilt, the corners, the angles, and the AccuQuilt dies, or how to cut them with a specialty ruler and convert them over. A top goal with me is that I like to reduce the seams so that I get a more cohesive finish. So like you see this giant star, it comes out really terrific because I don't have those little seams in between all those half square triangles. And so it really turned out spectacular. So we want to do that. The other thing is that you can make this out of simple blocks. You could say, all right, I'm just going to do these lessons and I am going to experiment with them. And each time we do a lesson, I'm going to make 1 or 3 or 4 blocks. You might make table runners by the season. That's your option. It's my firm belief and my experience as I've been watching people, too many times you get so caught up in making the quilt looking just like the kit that you don't trust your own voice. So the beautiful things that you see come up out of Mystery Monday don't come from me telling you what to do. It comes from you taking what you like for fabric. It's taking your skills and improving upon those skills. And that's why you're seeing the genius of all these pieces. And so as you're looking at the video that I have running right now, these are Mystery Mondays that we have done with people where they have taken their blocks and they've put them together into things that have turned into some of their most spectacular. And frankly, we have a few people that have been entering these in fairs and contests, and they're winning awards. This has nothing to do with that we provided you the pattern. It's that we connected your genius with the pattern. So let's get into looking at chisels. This is the next part of our lesson. We're going to break the elements down. We're going to make it so that you are more confident and comfortable with it. And if you launch from this and you start saying, hey, I really like doing that parallelogram and I want to do more with it, go back and look at that video again. You have a pattern in there that's for a full quilt. Go look at your stash. If you want to make it exactly the way we have it in the pattern, we have some kits for that. If you want to work out of your stash, go for it. Play with it. The more you play with patchwork, the happier you're going to become with your being able to use the fabric that you have and the fabric that you like. And you're also going to be able to start seeing this in patterns. It's making it easier for you to convert patterns. One of the most popular requests we have for classes is teaching people how to read patterns. That would like be saying, I want to travel the world and I want to be comfortable with all languages in the world. It's not humanly possible in a short amount of time. You could achieve it after a long period of time. But what we're doing is we're unifying this, that when you see this, so for example, when you see eggs on a menu in another language, you know, if somebody says, hey, that's an egg, or they point to a picture, you know what that is. That's what we're doing, is we're helping you to convert over. So when I show you the lessons, I show you how it would show up in a lot of patterns. I show you how to simplify it. I show you how to take it down over to a specialty ruler, or I show you how to take it over to AccuQuilt. That's my goal, is I want you to get more confident when you start seeing things, you start saying, is that this piece? Now, also in this Mystery Monday, we're tackling units that I really have never tackled in Mystery Monday before. So for example, we've alluded to or given a slight lesson on a parallelogram, but in this lesson that we did for the first lesson, we're really breaking it down. And so we're going to be saving you a lot of fabric. And that's a big thing to this, because when you read patterns that are very convoluted in how the pattern is written to get you there, a lot of times you're wasting way more fabric than mistakes that you'll make. And so what we want to do is do that, but we also want to help you to take ownership of your own work. So let's get into those chisels. So as I go into looking at different blocks, you're going to see the chisel as that pointy rectangle that you see in there. The chisel can be done by doing a fold over, but I love showing you how to make this so it's one big piece of fabric, and we have that half square triangle on the end of it to give it more continuity. And you're going to see some unique blocks here that don't look like your traditional fair. A lot of times they call these modern blocks, but they just really are a variation of traditional blocks by adding the chisel in there. What I love about the blocks that you're seeing is when you put them together, they look really terrific as offset blocks, but I really, really appreciate how that chisel makes a terrific border option with pretty much any of the blocks that you see that are designed in these pieces. I also love that the chisel is a really great element to make things where you can have a border, or you can just do using up all your scraps and make a really scrappy quilt. And it's really a great little unit. It's very fast to sew together, especially once I show you how to sew it together after you've cut it with either AccuQuilt or with a specialty ruler. I'm going to unlock that little secret for you to show you how that's possible. I love being able to do it where it's already cut out at the angle, because it gives a sharper point. More accuracy is going to really help you preserve the element of that little sharp point that you add into these pieces. And as you can see, it takes traditional blocks and it makes them really unique looking. And again, great border application, also great for sashings. But I really appreciate how you can take all the rest of your scraps, cut the whole thing up into chisels, even make the popular picket fence border. It's much more interesting than just a plain old piano key border. And the great thing about it is it uses up a lot of your scraps. So these are some really unique features that you can get going using the chisel and pairing it up with the other dies that you have in your cube. It's out of a companion cube that is called the Corners cube, and it's one that comes in all of the sizes of the AccuQuilt cubes, from the 4 all the way up to the newest one, the 16-inch. So let's get into it.
And so I'm going to bring out my batiks, and I'm going to be working out of these pieces. Now, when I'm working with these, I'm going to just take a few of them and work out of a few of the sections. And then I'll roll up the rest of my fabric. I'm going to pull out this orange because I do want to show you all a contrast piece in here. And so again, these are, as I've shown you in your first lesson, how I deal with my batiks. Ooh, wait a minute. I think this would be really cool as my contrast piece. So I'll pull this one out as a contrast piece. And it's just so I can show you how to put the half square triangles on there. So I'm going to go ahead and roll it all back up again, and so that it's ready for next time. And again, I like to have this fabric rolled up because then the next time I go to use it, I don't have to re-iron it all the time. So let's look at what a chisel typically looks like. Now I'm going to be working with pieces that would be as if I was working from an 8-inch cube. And we're going to go in here and I'm going to show you how we cut this traditionally and then how we would cut it with a specialty ruler. So let me get in a little bit closer here for you. And traditionally, when you see a chisel, what they'll do is they'll cut a rectangle and then a square and then overcut them. Now if I'm doing this out of a 8-inch cube, that means I'm cutting a 2.5 by 4.5. So I have 2 fabrics here. I flip them around, and I'm using from this set, this is the ruler that is in the rectangles. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when I say I'm cutting this 4, what I'm looking at down here is I'm looking at the line that every time I have one of those wide lines, it's a 1/4 inch. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's 4/8. And so that is a half. And then I've got up here, I've got 2.5. I'm going to go ahead and trim this off. So typically, what you see, and I'm going to go grab that contrast fabric, is we're going to cut off a 2.5-inch strip because I'm going to show you a couple of ways that we could do this. Bring it up like this. And whenever I cut off of a fabric, what I'll do is I actually first cut past my 2.5 inches. Now if you notice when I folded that, this piece down here where I've got that line on the fold, this keeps me from getting a V in my strip when I cut it. And so I'm going to cut on that piece, and I'm cutting past my 2.5. So I've got that line. I'm going to flip it over one time, and now I'm going to come back and trim it down into my 2.5-inch strip. Alright. Now, another ruler in that set of the basic squares and rectangles is a square, and I like a square because when I'm using that, if you notice in this piece, do you see how there's that line that shows me my 2.5? So I'm going to cut this piece. I'm going to turn around and clean up that piece because we cut it in rather than cut backwards and straighten out that line. That way then I have a cleaner cut. So if I was making this as a traditional chisel, I would take one of my rectangles, and like I said, this is how 90% of the chisels are written. And so what they'll do is they'll have you fold this in half, and I will actually use my point-to-point turner on this and then draw a line on there. I prefer to etch it in with finger pressing. Then I'm going to sew along this piece, and I'm going to flip it out this way. And so if I was going to do it opposite, then I would sew it on this way. So when you're doing this method for this, then what ends up happening is that it doesn't matter the right side up or not, because you decide it when you sew it. Now I'm going to show you another way to do this. And another way would be, I've got a 2.5 inch strip here, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to take my half square triangle and I'm going to cut my triangles out of this. So I've got this lined up here. This is my 2.5, and I've got this base piece down here square, and then it comes and it flips in that way. And I do my one cut, and now I've got a half square triangle. And these were some of the lessons that we showed from one when we were showing how to cut half square triangles. Now, the tricky thing about this, if you're using AccuQuilt, you can actually lay this piece on that unit like this, and you could actually sew right here. Do you see how that lines up? Now, it's a little trickier with when we go and we look at it and we say, where does that actually cross? Well, you can see down here on this piece, when I go from this corner down to here, I absolutely have to have it fitting into those two pieces. Then when I would turn it back, I would get my chisel, right? Let's look at something else though. Is that either using this method where I fold it back, your sewing line is going to be down here about here, but when you put it in here, if you notice with this, when I lined it up, this piece could be trimmed off. So could we possibly trim off this section and get a chisel? Well, you really do have to think about this, because what you need is you need to leave enough leverage in there that you can cut this. And so what that means is that I have to line this up so that my point is off of that end. Or I can line it up this way, and I can use the top of that ruler, and I can cut it out like this. So if you notice, the top of your half square triangle ruler will allow you to do that. Now, I will tell you this isn't 100% accurate, but it will work. And here's why I say it's not 100% accurate. When I go back on the back of this piece, if you notice that, it's going to line up there and it's going to get what I need to do, and so it's still the same thing. So this is another way of possibly doing this using a specialty ruler. However, let's go back and look at these elements. When we look at this element and we look at this element, we have those two pieces in a standard AccuQuilt cube. So we have die number 8 and we have die number 2. So this is a 2.5 inch. Okay, so that would make the finished piece like this. Now the other die that we have is we're going to go over to our corners companion, and in the corners companion, this is the chisel. Therefore, what I would do is that if I was going to cut the chisel using these pieces, I can go ahead and cut my pieces just a little bit bigger than this. So I'm going to lay that out there, and so if you notice, it's 2.5 by 4.5. Well, lo and behold, that's the same size as this piece, but it already has that corner notched out. Now the kind of the tricky thing about this is people are like, will I really use a corners cube companion to the AccuQuilt? And my answer was at first I didn't think I would, but I love this for being able to cut up a border. And so when I say cut up a border, if I was going to cut up a lot of these pieces, I would start cutting them up with my scraps. And what that looks like is this. There's a couple of ways of doing it. One is I can lay the scraps down on like this and just keep laying them down as they'll fit on there. So you see what's going on here is I'm starting to go through my scraps that I had left over, and look at that, I can even cut an old parallelogram. Now, the thing that I found that was a little bit deceiving in using this is that these can become directional. And so for when we look at these, the ones that I've already cut out of these pieces, I have cut so that the background is facing up. If I want a picket fence where I have two of them facing on opposite sides of each other like this, I'm just going to put these in here so you can see what I'm trying to achieve here. If I want that look, then I have to have one up and one down. With batiks, it's not going to matter quite as much, but with fabrics that have a definite right and wrong side, I'm going to have to look at that a little bit more carefully. So the chisel is going to be the largest piece that we are going to be looking at. And we're going to look at a couple of versions of chisels.
So let's work on putting together this block. I like this little version, and what you can see here is that it's the chisel and it's paired up with two small squares. And if you put this together a variety of different ways, you can actually get a weave through this. So I've cut out some of the elements. I'm using my 8-inch cube, and I cut out the elements from these yellow and blue fabrics, and I'm laying them out in front of the needle to show you how I would get these going into the machine. So I would sew each quadrant in the elements the way that they are in the pattern. And as you can see with these, I'm pulling together first my squares, because those are little pairs of two squares put together. And then I'm going to pull out my chisel pieces and start lining up my chisel along with my half square triangles. And so I'm getting this all stacked up to put together into the machine. And as I walk into the machine with my 2-inch, my two squares, my 2.5-inch squares for this one, using it from the cube, I'm using my tailor's awl. This is a clover tailor's awl that I'm working with. I prefer my Annie's, but it's gone MIA right now, and I'm sure I'll find it. And then I'm going to walk this into the machine with that half square triangle attached to the chisels. And I'm going ahead and chaining it in there with the other pieces. Now notice that these chisels all face the same direction. That means either you're going to cut all the fabrics right side up or right side down, so that I get this pinwheel effect that's around there. Now I'm going through and I'm releasing my little two squares. I'm using my point to point turner, and so then what I can do is that I'm flattening out those seams. I'm moving the seams away from that yellow background and towards the blues, because as I'm looking ahead, they're going to be having some converging seams, and I want to make sure that I'm controlling it at this point. Again, I'm using my point-to-point turner rather than iron it, because if I have to turn the seam going the other way, so be it. Now, since I sent the other fabrics towards the dark, towards the blue, I'm doing the same thing on my chisels. And so I'm doing my pressing, so that my finger pressing with my point-to-point, so it's towards the blue, so I have locking seams. That means when I go to put them up against their partners, they will go the opposite directions. And so you can see here, I'm stacking them up according to the elements, and then I'm walking them into the machines. And so as I'm sewing these together, I am putting together the quadrants. And I like to do this block by block because I can still see the direction I'm going. I would never chain piece together 12 or 14 or 28 of these at a time. I still like to work on one block at a time, especially with the orientation of that chisel block in there. And so I'm going ahead and I'm releasing them, and then I'm doing my pressing with my point-to-point turner, and this time I'm pressing them away from the chisel, so I reduce some of that bulk. Now if you notice in the upper left, you see my block is starting to come together. And this is also why I like working like this, because I can control the direction the seams are going. I can actually make sure I'm checking to make sure the orientation is right. Orientation becomes a big deal when you've got a chisel that can go left or right. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure we have that under control. Now, if I got in the habit of doing several of these, I might still put some elements together in fours, but I always like to work with the block this way, because I hate to make a mistake on block number 3 and then have to unsew 18 or 24 blocks because I didn't check my work. So there I keep adding corners onto the other pieces, and those are serving as my leaders and enders, because I'm going to be showing you later on about doing the picket fence border. So I've cut up my other fabrics into chisels so that I can work on them while I'm working on this block. Look at how fascinating this block turns out too. And this is just entirely out of scraps from another quilt. And I use the yellow as a background per se. And I've got that element in there. Now I'm going to go on and I'm working on that another block. This is the next block that you see in your instructions. And in this one instead, I'm putting chisel to chisel. So all the elements in this block are put together with chisels. No half square triangles in this. And so I've got a background fabric, which I'm using as my yellow, and I'm building those elements out. Now, if you can see here, those little chisels that are coming out with just a square on them, that's my enders and leaders. So I'm working on the 3 columns of the 4 quadrants of that block that we have in your instructions. And these are all made from the 8-inch cube. That means the width of that unit is going to be 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches. So each one of these segments is going to finish up, in each one of these quadrants that you see there is going to finish up at 6 by 6 inches finished. That's because what we're doing is we're adding the longer chisel pieces together. We're not putting a little half square triangle on there. And so as you can see how I'm building this out, I have the yellow fabrics towards the outside edge. This creates a pinwheel when I go to put them together into the block. If I was using this block for an entire quilt, I would have a really fascinating finished block. So you can see the elements that are coming together. There are 3 columns of only the chisels put together. And so the chisels are being put together, and this one in particular is blues, that's the main part of it, and then the yellows. And from that picture that I showed you, you can see that those stars, those friendship stars that would come out, would be yellow in this one if I chose to continue with this. This is a really good block to make. It's going to be a 12-inch finished if you make it with an 8-inch cube. And on your instructions, it shows you what size finished block this would be if I made it with other sizes of the cubes. Now you can make these elements, the chisels, this way, using a technique that I'm going to show you in a little bit on how to put those together if you were just working with rectangles. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this block with the chisels paired up, and you can see I'm making each of the quadrants the exact same pieces. Now I chose to put the yellow on the opposing corners in different colors. That way then I made the star, the inset star in there, a little bit more unique. And I'm finger pressing these out, and you can see I'm getting my other quadrants added in there as I put them in. And then when I'm done with this, I start putting through some more of those chisels, because that's a piece that I'm going to be showing you how we're putting it together. So I'm actually stitching together now the pieces of the block into the quadrants. So I'm working on each segment, each quadrant of that block, just putting the pieces together. If I was going to make a lot of these, I would probably still do it this way, where I would create the 3 columns, and then I could mix them up with this. As you saw with the pattern that I showed you before, this is a great technique for scrappy. So if you have a lot of mixture, this is what you're going to get. So my block is very controlled. As you can see, I have a mixture of blues in there, but I also controlled the direction that that center pinwheel worked. And if you notice, when you see how I did that, is that I just did opposing yellows in the 2 sides of it. And that would work throughout the whole quilt if I made this into a quilt. This is a finished block that's 12 inches finished, and I made it from my 8-inch cube. Great block to make for playing with the chisels.
So we're going to play with some of these elements because I want to show you some really fun things that I discovered along the way of working on these. First off, the one we just finished and I showed you was showing you how we sewed those pieces together, the 2 chisels. But I want to show you how you would do that if you chose to do it the traditional way. Or here's the other way you can do it, is you can take the 2 pieces together. And so this is 2 rectangles. This one for the 8-inch cube is a 2.5 by 4.5. And I've put 2 rectangles together into this unit. And then what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to grab my straight edge and I'm going to put it down here, and I've got my point-to-point turner, and I'm going to etch this in here. Now I could etch that, of course, with a pencil or a chalk liner, but I like this because on this end I've got that hera, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this on a diagonal. because I want to show you, and I'm using actually my clover awl for this one. I temporarily misplaced my Annie's. I think someone used it to take Legos apart or something. So I'll find it, I'm sure. And we're going to be putting this together. So I'm going to show you that what we had just done with the AccuQuilt, we can also do just with rectangles and squares. This is how most patterns are written, and I want to show you what that looks like. Now the other one is that if I was going to do this with the square and I was just going to make my chisel piece on here, then I would put my piece on this. And if you notice with this one in particular, we have a diagonal issue to deal with. However, for right now, I'm not going to study it. I'm just going to make them. Already I have a stack of several that I've added the diagonals onto, and I want to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to make more of these, because I have a reason, as I'm looking at a border, or I have one more panel left of this that I want to add these pieces onto. The great thing about all the blocks and all the options that you have, and these are part of the ones that I'm showing you are part of the 72 that are in the publication that comes with the cubes, and so that you can actually look these up. Now, if you look at this, is now I have that unit that I just built with my chisel and my half square triangle. And at this point, I am going to trim out the back of this. Now, normally when I do a fold over, I tell you not to do this because I don't like having missing out that back piece. However, it does us no good here. That's why we were really careful about how we sewed it. I use my Karen K. Buckley scissors here because then I am able to cut it out nice and clean. And so there, I've got one of my pieces built out. So these are the elements such as what we built in those pieces. Now, when I put those two pieces together the way that I've shown you, is another way that I could do this, when I put them together on these two diagonals, I could have actually trimmed that out so that it was the 1/4 inch away from that seam to fit that in there. However, I want to show you something that's really kind of cool with this, is I'm going to take another one of these elements, the blue rectangles, and I'm going to attach it to the other side, because now I'm going to create an entirely different element. Now, notice this is if I put it that way, I would be sandwiching that between, I would be creating a parallelogram, so that's a possibility. That's not my intent. I really want this to be a flying geese stuck between the two rectangles. So technically, this would be like the other half square triangle, and here's the square on the side. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to tuck it in here, and we're going to mark that corner again. I got to be able to see that corner in there, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to etch that line in. Okay, here we go. I've got my line etched in there. My light on this machine is really good, and so it sometimes can be kind of hard for you to see. Trust me, I can see it. I have great light under this machine. Okay, so I'm going to pull this piece out because that piece is done. This is how one way that you see chisels traditionally made. You want to go and check that video that I showed you how you could actually cut these pieces, because frankly this is a little hard to do concisely. Now in this one in particular, this is my preference, is I would prefer that we leave that back fabric on, because the back of that fabric is the only thing that I know is accurate to make sure that I'm still getting that piece, the base piece, to be 2.5 by 4.5 inches. So that is part of how that piece fits into there. And then if we look at this side on this piece, I could actually add another piece onto the side of this. I could actually add another rectangle onto it and then extend it out that way. So there's a lot of things that you can do with these units as you're working with them in the chisels. So as we go ahead, and we're going to pull that piece out, and I'm going to go ahead and grab another element, and I'm going to put it together with another one of my little yellow pieces, because I have a whole set of units that I've built in here that I'm working on. So I'm going to be building out more of the blocks as what I've shown you. And those blocks are, most of them, the ones that I was examining, are that everything goes in the same direction. However, please notice that when you make this as a border, if you were choosing to make these as a border, you can make them looking like picket fences. So look what we've just created here. So we've tucked that in between. This would be a really great border piece to have flying geese traveling, and you would cut it normally with the chisels and the quarter square triangle. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that if I was going to be doing it with that. So I have a quarter square triangle die piece, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pair these up on either side. Hopefully I have a left and a right boot. I always call these left and right boots because you need both. And so on these pieces I can go ahead and sew them together in the same way. And with the AccuQuilt, and this works on all of the cubes, so as you go through the cubes and you look at the elements, then what it can do is you can make these rectangles so that they would become a border around the outside edge of the quilt, using the chisel and pairing it up with a quarter square. On the chisel, when you see it, normally you only see it described that it will fit that small half square triangle. However, you're seeing here that it will also fit around the quarter square triangle, which is really kind of a glorious magic. So we've got one going in there. I'm going to take the other piece, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it together. Actually, let me get another one put on there so that I can get them out of the sewing machine so I can show you how to add the other side to it. Okay, reach around the back with my Ginger clips. Now, how do I press these? Well, typically I press flying geese towards the sky. So look what we have going on here. So I'm going to go grab another chisel. This chisel goes in the opposite direction. Now, as you've noticed, and probably already you've maybe made note of this, Jill, you didn't follow the same rule, that you start at the nose and go down. You're right, you're right. I'm still learning. This is not one that I've played with a lot. So you're right, I would do it the same rules as what we normally do, where I would sew the left sky on to a goose and then sew the right sky on. There we go, there's another piece. And that one is in my sewing machine. So let me go grab another one and attach another of my half square triangles to that piece. Starting to run out of them. These pieces that I have are remainders from another quilt that I done, and this is the last of the pieces with this. But I love this because I can also use these elements. So when I talked to you before about what you could do with these as far as borders on a quilt or a panel surrounding, look what's going on here. However, what I also can do is I could go ahead and put these pieces together this way and make them for a cuff on a pillowcase. So look what's happening there. So wouldn't that be a terrific border to be sewing those together? The other thing that I can do is that I can actually sew this piece over here. So in other words, I would do a half square triangle here, and then I could put another square over on this side and make it go back and forth. The other thing that I can do is I can put them so they go nose to nose. I can put them so that they go one off of each other. I could put this in this space like this where it comes over to here and then put a different square over there. There's so many things you can do if you take the time and you just start playing with your fabrics. So that's one of the pieces I want to show you. Little picket fence borders. And so this one is one that's made with the chisel and then the half square triangle and then sewing them together. Now just a hint on when I did the finger pressing on these. I found that when I did one side of them, I pressed it towards the blue, the other side I pressed it towards the yellow. And by not doing all of them at one time but just playing with them like this, you start realizing I didn't press them wrong, and I didn't press them, I used my finger pressing tool. Now as I was playing with this, I thought, well, as much as I adore this little border, and it's a great border, I wondered what would happen if I was to flip one going one way and one going the other way. Look at that. Isn't that just about as cute? So options abound with this. Now I want to show you and explore, since we did Y seams in our last lesson, I want to show you the potential for a Y seam doing that little picket border. And as you can see, I have these arranged so that I have a left and a right. And so I've got these together. Hopefully I have enough to show you to do a decent demonstration. Great. However, what I did, and this is something that they don't show you in AccuQuilt, but these are half square triangles, and so we're going to look at creating a Y seam where we're going to do that little picket fence, but we're going to do it into twosies. So I want to show you how I do this. I love this little option, especially with AccuQuilt, because I have the pieces that are in here that fit together really, really well. Now, if you notice with this piece is that my Y seam is going to come right here in the middle of this, and it truly is the letter Y. So this is where a Y seam really makes, we're going to make these little Ys. So I'm going to come up here, and then I'm going to go in, and then what I'm stopping at is that I've got right here in front of my foot, there's a little hash mark in there, and then next to that hash mark, that's where my needle is. So that's exactly where my needle is landing. Let me get a little bit closer there. So on this foot in particular, this is a 37 foot, it's a 97 foot, and this foot fits all of the Bernina machines, even the older machines. But what I love about how this works is that this little chop right there, this little notch, is right at the point of the needle. There's a notch behind it, and that's the point 1/4 of an inch behind the needle. And there's a notch in front of it that's 1/4 inch in front of the needle. Now the tricky part about this is that the 1/4 inch isn't exactly at that point. And so you could take this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the first one, and I'm going to take my handy dandy piece in here, and I'm going to just make a little line in there to just show me where that point is. Now I could actually put my tailor's awl in there and sew right up to that point and stop, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up about 2 stitches, and then I'm going to use my thread cutter. I am not typically a big fan of using a thread cutter when I'm piecing, and just because I don't like the long threads over the back of it. So you see, what we have just created is the perfect opportunity for a Y seam. Now, no, I will not press this seam open because I don't need to do that. And so I'm going to press it to one direction. Now what you're going to see is that yellow triangle is going to fit in there beautifully. So what I'm going to do is that once I line that up there, look at how beautiful that lines up with that piece. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to sew with my perfect 1/4 inch right up to that point. Now, because I can feel where that's notched in there, I'm going to go right to that seam. One tiny more little stitch. And it's actually just fine to go a little bit short of that. See, like if I look at that in there, well, no, I hit it right on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist my work this way. And let me step out on my seam a little bit so I can show you how I'm twisting that. But look at how glorious this is. Look what just happened there. This thing folds like it knows right where to go. I told it where we were headed. Now, I have a couple of choices here. I'm actually going to choose to sew it right at that point, and I'm going to go, I'm about maybe 1 stitch this way towards me, close to that. And so I'm going to go forward 1 stitch just to make sure, and I'm going to go 2 stitches. And then I'm back into that spot, and then at this point I'm going to use my tailor's awl to hold this together, and I'm going to head right up to this point. Now I will not back stitch at that point. That's because my stitch is consistent, and we've had this question from people saying my stitches sometimes come out. Well, you can shorten your stitch a little bit But if your stitches are coming out on the ends of these, it's a tension issue probably with your machine. It's probably time to get it serviced professionally. Now look what happens here. We do service all makes and models of machines, and our technicians are really good at that. But look at how beautiful that little Y seam turned out. So I'm going to go ahead, and while it's here, I'm going to do some little pressing on it with my point-to-point turner. Now look what happens to that seam on the back. Now, for some of you, you're really bothered by that, so there's another way to do this, is we could actually press both of them coming this way. So I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to repress it. Again, the beauty of not going to the iron is I'm just telling the direction the seam that's supposed to go. Now look at the back. Look at how lovely that is. Isn't that perfectly beautiful? So let's sew some more in here. This was a blast. Now, your first one might be absolutely horrific, and your third one might be terrific, and your third, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, and you need to stop worrying about it being perfect. You are perfectly lovely, creative, and most people can't do what you do, and you need to just accept that and say, well, thank you very much. Do I do that all the time? No, I don't. Now, watch what starts to happen. As you get really experienced and do quite a few of these, you're going to start knowing where that 1/4 inch is. So I back up that stitch a couple stitches, use my thread cutter. We just had some glorious releases of new machines with Bernina, and they've got thread cutters all the way down to the great travel machines, and we are pretty excited about what we're seeing. So let us know. We'd love to show you what the possibilities are. But look at this, how much easier. You're going to get so good at this that you're going to look for opportunities to use this seam. So I'm coming in here, and this time I press my seam the other way, but I can actually see it there. And I've stuck my tailor's awl in there so I can see exactly where that dot is. 2 stitches back, I cut it off. Then I'm going to flip it. Turn it this way. Now, can you sew it from this side? You can. You can sew it from either side. So I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to sew it the other way. And this time I'm going to come in at this angle. Now, if you noticed in there, what happened was I got a little bit too close to that center piece. So it's still going to be fine. I might have a little bobble in there, but I can use that tailor's awl to catch that out. Now I've made the decision at this point that I'm going to press it away from that V. Now you see that tiny little bobble in there? Oh well, it's tiny. It's a chance to, I tried to sew it in a different way. So be it. Done. Look at how great that looks together. Isn't that terrific? I do kind of like this. I like this look too. I think that's a really great look to it. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch on to my next one. Oh wait, I have all left boots now. Oh rats. I need to cut some more. Okay, I'll go to cutting. You've got a chance to see a really good run on this one. And like I said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to aim towards that picket fence going this way. Now, you would be, if it's your own work, many of you would not even think about putting this in with the rest of them. I do. I absolutely will put it into the rest of them. I do not want to get wigged out by thinking it's not good enough. And plus the fact, I'm not going to cut up a bunch more fabric just to make this fit. Now, can you sew the Y seam the other way? Yes, you can. So you could sew it down to here, down to this point, and back it up, and then make your last seam be this way. But then you almost have 2 Y seams that you're making together, and I'm not sure that I'm much interested in doing that. So what I'm going to do here is because I want to keep going with this chain that I have going on, is I'm going to sew this together with my other pieces, and then I'm going to seam rip the rest of them off, so I'm making the same thing for the whole piece of it. So I keep chain piecing it. I always look for more opportunities to chain piece. Now you could actually trim up this whole border and make it make this whole thing so that you're making it while you're making a quilt. It is totally legitimate to cut up and make a border while you're making the quilt. If you notice, I chain piece that in because this border is already getting long enough that I can add to both ends of the border. Okay. So let's see what's going on. Let's do that thread cutter there. Alright, let's look at it. Alright, so I've got a couple of my Y seams in there. I've got my Y seams going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then they all go the one direction. So I can actually unhook these. I'm probably going to just disconnect it from here so I can take some pictures to show you what both of the border options look like. So there you go. There's a chance to make the purest form of the chisel. Work with a braid border, and this is cut with a chisel only in as much as when you cut it, you have to keep in mind this outer edge is a bias edge, so you do not want to overpress this. And you also have to cut these so that they go in opposite directions. So what you're seeing here is I cut these out of a 6-inch cube, so it's the corners cube out of this. And as I cut these pieces, I'm going to first show you how I'm going to sew them together, where I'm not going to sew, there will be no chain piecing on this. So everything that I do is going to be for learning. So the first thing I'm going to do is I put them in here so that you can see this first pieces that I'm picking up right up there are the bottoms of the two of them together. And so you can see it doesn't go across the whole piece. And so the first piece I'm going to put in together is I'm going to sew these two pieces together. Then I'm going to use my thread cutter. I'm going to cut them off, and then I'm going to lay it back down so I can check my orientation. So thread cutter, and then I'm going to press it using my point to point, and then I'm going to lay it back down and see what my next piece that I put on there. So my next piece that I'm going to attach is this piece, and I'm going to be attaching it starting at the bottom and moving up. Now, if you go ahead and sew this together this way, you might be concerned that I'm not doing any back stitching on the ends. That's largely because when I get this all pressed out, the next thing that I will be doing is I will be doing a stay stitching along the two sides. So there's my next piece. So you can see how this is working in. Now, I would not for a second doubt that after you do, maybe 36 inches of this, it's going to start getting a rhythm and a system to it that you might figure out a way to chain piece it. This is something that's going to take a little bit of concentration to do. But you can see in less than 2.5 minutes, I've already kind of gotten a rhythm going on here. So there's my next pieces in there. And so then I'm going to put the next piece on it. The key to me appears that you have to have the left and the right going directly in the right direction. Now this would make a really terrific quilt all by itself. I'm using one of my smallest. There's actually a smaller cube than a 6-inch. There's a 4-inch. And so the width of this piece is measuring a little 3.5 inches, of course. And so now I've turned that piece accidentally, but it didn't take me long to figure out where to put it. You could, if you wanted to chain piece this together, if you were going to make this multiple braids, you could go ahead and do another side of your quilt, or you could do a different braid. So if you were going to make this long braids, but look at how beautiful this is turning out. In no time at all, you've got this singing along. Now normally when you see braids like this, what they'll do is they'll sew the braids in as rectangles, and then they'll trim off the sides. So the only thing that's different here is that piece is making the sides work out for you. This would be a very, very satisfying piece to do. So in less than 5 minutes, I've stitched up quite a bit of it already. And what I started doing, what I started realizing is that by keeping the pieces that were directional that way on this side and the pieces that were directional on this side, I could start picking up my pieces and then putting them on without having to lay the whole thing out. There we go. There we are. And you're going to start seeing yourself get a little fussy about things. I don't want this piece next to that piece. And as far as if you're going to sew from the back, the piece on top, or the next cut piece on top, that's really a matter of preference. What's nice about this is you're doing a nice clean cut on everything as you go along, and you have more latitude. I'm finding that this is a little bit more forgiving as far as if I don't have quite so many colors, because even if a braid piece ends up like within 2 colors of the other one, you really don't notice it. So if I didn't have a lot of variety in my fabrics, this would be a really easy way to do it. Isn't that terrific? Nice little braid. And again, this is made with a 6-inch cube. If I was going to make this with an 8-inch cube, this would be 4.5 inches across, 4 inches finished. If I was going to make it with a 12-inch cube, it would be 6.5 inches across, 6 inches finished. If I was going to make it with a 16-inch cube, this would be 8 inches across, finished. So lots of great options, and it's nice and sweet. On this particular chisel, on the 6-inch cube, what's interesting is the die is configured this way. So when I was looking at it, you could conceivably repair that this would be your straight of the grain. I would personally not mess with that, but just wanted to see that option. Isn't that great?
So we've given you lots of ideas of how the chisel can be really an important feature in your sewing experience. My hope for you is that you give yourself permission to sew and play with fabric, play with the elements. You will discover so much more by just working with these pieces and seeing how much fun they are. Try not to get yourself really caught up in an assignment, but just experiment with the elements that I gave you in the instructions. Follow the video, send me any questions. Happy to help you be inspired to sew more and more as you play with your fabric and discover the designer within.